Coming up on Global Business, President Xi Jinping leads for South Africa as leaders of BRICS countries prepare to hold talks on membership expansion and economic relations. China's banking sector plays a pivotal role by providing crucial support to its high-tech industries. And German producer prices experienced their first year-on-year decline in over 2.5 years during July. Hello and welcome to this edition of Global Business here on CGTN. I'm Guanxin in Beijing. And first up in the program, Chinese President Xi Jinping is traveling to Johannesburg to attend the 2023 BRICS Summit and pay a state visit to South Africa. His signed article was published on South African media ahead of his visit. In the article, he urged more friendship and cooperation with South Africa to achieve greater success. He said China-South Africa relations are standing at a new historical starting point. In face of the profound changes unseen in a century, a strong and productive China-Africa cooperation will provide more fresh impetus to global development and ensure greater stability of the world. He added that China and South Africa, as members of the Global South, should work together to appeal for greater voice and influence of developing countries in international affairs, promote accelerated reform of international financial institutions, and oppose unilateral sanctions. Earlier, Martin Kingston, chairman of the Steering Committee of Business for South Africa, shared his views on the cooperation in the agriculture, energy, and manufacturing industries between China and African countries. Take a listen.
Building an export base in South Africa to leverage off our own manufacturing capability and export to the rest of the continent. As I said, in the case of energy, it's a critical issue. For decades, we've had the largest integrated energy system in the world, but supply has not kept up with demand, unfortunately. And the just transition, and we need to talk about the just transition, is an absolutely essential driver for all countries, and in particular for South Africa, where we try and decarbonize our economy without inflicting a huge damage on the very many jobs that are potentially at risk as we move away from, in particular, a coal-based economy to others. China can be of considerable assistance there. In the case of agriculture and agro-industry, Africa has enormous potential, not just South Africa, but the continent, in terms of the consumption and indeed the processing and export of agricultural product. Thus far, we've not managed to achieve the potential that exists. Once again, enormous scope for China and Africa, indeed via South Africa, inter alia. Once again, I have absolutely no doubt that China can play a significant role. And I want to just emphasize what I said before, which is that a focused, disciplined approach on bilateral as well as multilateral relations lies at the heart of this, building trust, confidence, and relations between individuals, between institutions, and indeed between countries. And that, of course, is in part what President Xi Jinping has been referring to in his article.
And now, for more details on the meeting, we're joined by our reporter Zhao Yunfei on the ground in Johannesburg. Hi there, Yunfei. Good to see you. So what are the highlights for economic cooperation between the two countries?
Well, Guanxin, there are so many things on the agenda for the upcoming BRICS Summit, and there are so many economic perspectives. First of all, a lot of discussion is going on based on the recruitment members of the BRICS Summit, because so far about 40 countries have expressed keen to join the group, and 23 official requests have been made, and that showcases how so many countries are interested to join the group with emerging economies. And there are also other things on the agenda, such as de-dollarization. This is something that initially raised by President Lula. And given the fact that US dollars is so repeatedly used as weapons for sanctions, especially amid the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, many countries are trying to seeking alternative rather than the US dollar. And also the sustainable development, and it's also one of the core issues that's being discussed in the upcoming BRICS Summit. I went to the BRICS Business Council and talked to the deputy chairperson of Energy and Green Economy, and she told me why the topic of sustainability is so important under the BRICS mechanism.
The benefits of the BRICS nations grouping really is around a common theme as developing nations and their regional blocs to look to unlock efficiencies and mutually beneficial opportunities in sustainable development, wherein the grouping is on a regular basis sharing thought leadership, influencing policy, mobilizing financing. We've seen the new development bank formed specifically for that. We're also looking at a new clean energy fund, specifically looking at the transition and in green economy. In that theme is also the ongoing theme around mutual trade and multilateralism. So the BRICS nations grouping certainly differentiated from that perspective. It has a focus on developing nations. It has a focus on regional integration. So it certainly has a place on the stage alongside other regional blocs.
I'll look forward to more in-depth discussion on those economic issues. And Yunfei, what topics are high on the agenda? What can we expect from tomorrow's meeting?
Well, there are so many things on the itinerary, it's hard to predict what precisely happened for tomorrow, but there are several phases that we are looking forward to. First of all is the state visit by the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and also in the coming few days, we're expecting bilateral meetings between heads of states across the BRICS members, as well as other participating countries, given the fact that President Ramaphosa is sending invitation to all of the state of leaders of African countries, as well as many leaders of the countries that belongs to the global south. Now, speaking of President Xi's visit, and we're waiting for his visit. This is supposed to be the first day, so he should be coming here, touchdown in Johannesburg anytime today. And this is precisely the only state visit that South Africa is hosting during the BRICS summit. And for President Xi, it's his sixth visit to South Africa. As you mentioned, he published an article this morning on local press, and President Xi has celebrated the diplomatic ties between China and South Africa over the past 25 years.
Well, thank you so much for all that information. Our reporter Zhao Yunfei in Johannesburg for us. Well, trade between China and other members of BRICS has been growing. First, the big picture. In the first 7 months of 2023, China's trade with BRICS partners increased by more than 19% from a year ago, reaching nearly 2.4 trillion yuan. That's over $328 billion US. China's imports of agricultural products increased by nearly 15% from a year ago to 270 billion yuan. Its imports of energy products such as crude oil, coal, and natural gas rose by over 17% to 422 billion yuan. China's energy company CHN Energy has signed a memorandum of understanding with South African company Eskom to boost strategic ties in traditional and renewable energy fields. In terms of China's exports, mechanical and electrical products exported to BRICS partners has increased by 38% to 759 billion yuan. Among these, lithium battery exports have increased by nearly 130%, while exports of electric vehicles rose by more than 600%. And now for more discussions on the 2023 BRICS Summit and economic relations between the member countries, we're now joined by Parik Carmody, Professor of Geography at Trinity College, Dublin. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. So with the inclusion of African heads of state, the 2023 BRICS Summit hosted by South Africa gained significance. What key discussions and objectives do you anticipate at this summit, particularly with the expanded African representation?
Sure. So I think thanks for having me, first of all. I think your reporter covered some of the main items there. I think that the fact that South Africa is hosting it, and I think about 30 African heads of state and government are slated to attend, means that there will be a focus on African development issues, African security issues. One of the issues that's most important at the moment is around, of course, food security and food price inflation, partly as a result of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has driven up food prices globally. So I think that's one of the things. Your reporter also mentioned about the potential expansion of the group. So the BRICS has now opened itself up for applications for other countries to apply. It'll be interesting to see whether there are some African countries like Senegal, I think, and Ethiopia, which have formally applied for membership. So I think that will be part of the discussions, and it will be interesting to see how that goes. Reportedly, different BRICS members are more or less keen on expansion, so that is another area for discussion. I think the UN Secretary General is also in attendance, and issues of sustainable development are always high on his agenda. And I think he will be keen to try and revive the Black Sea grain deal as well that Russia pulled out of recently, to try and make sure to try and take some of the upward pressure off food prices in international markets. So I think those are some of the big issues that will be discussed. The other issue that was touted as potentially being discussed, and again your correspondent mentioned it there, is this idea of de-dollarization and a potential new BRICS currency. Now, apparently the South Africans have said that's not going to be formally on the agenda, the creation of a new BRICS currency, which could be used for trade within the bloc. But still, that might be discussed as something which can be discussed more at future summits.
They're very important issues to discuss. And Professor, the BRICS nations have positioned their cooperative framework as an alternative to Western-dominated institutions. How might BRICS introduce fresh models for global multilateral collaboration, catering to the interests of emerging economies?
Sure. So I think if you look at the history of the BRICS and its foundation, the first meeting was in 2009. I think it was first mooted in the mid-2000s, but it was just as the global financial, or so-called global financial crisis was happening, or more accurately, I think as it's called in some Chinese media, the North Atlantic financial crisis. And so the formation of the BRICS took place in that context. And obviously many countries were very badly affected by that financial crisis, including Ireland, where I'm based. Many countries had to turn to the International Monetary Fund and had to implement harsh austerity measures. So I think we should look at the foundation of the BRICS in that kind of context. And two of the concrete things that the BRICS have done has been to set up a contingency reserve arrangement, whereby the member states can get access to liquidity in the case of a financial crisis, that they don't necessarily have to turn to the IMF. But if you draw down more than 30% of your quota, or your allotted money, if you like, under that scheme, you have to have an IMF program in place. So the BRICS, both at one level, is a partial competitor to the IMF and the other Western-dominated financial institutions, at the same time as it synergizes with them. And all of the BRICS members are members of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund as well. And then the second substantive thing that the BRICS have done in this area is to set up this new development bank. Again, it's something which can be seen as a competitor to the World Bank and the other regional development banks, or it could be seen as something which is bringing additional finance to international development as additive. And it partly depends on the different governments' perspectives, or your own perspective on these, which you prefer to emphasize, if you like.
And BRICS is committed to hastening the transformation of global economic governance for greater inclusivity and representation. To what extent has BRICS succeeded in amplifying the voice and influence of emerging economies on the global stage?
Yeah. So again, a very interesting question. And I suppose BRICS is a little bit different from some of these other groupings like the European Union or like some of the other institutions we've been talking about. It's less formalized. Obviously, there are formal agreements around the New Development Bank and the Contingency Reserve Agreement, but it's a more variable geometry, and it's quite a mixed group of countries with different interests and priorities. So the extent to which the BRICS is obviously a very high-profile international forum. It's a kind of top table of global geopolitics now, and obviously attracts a lot of media attention and coverage. And so some of the issues that concern the grouping obviously get that attention globally in a way that they wouldn't. But currently it's only 5 countries, and I suppose some people question how representative those countries are. So, for example, the South African government sometimes claims to be the voice of Africa, but other people might contest that. Why should South Africa necessarily be a member as opposed to Nigeria, which has a bigger economy, or Ethiopia, which has a bigger population? So the BRICS countries have brought certain issues to the fore, and they have their own distinctive modalities of international development cooperation, some of which are very worthwhile and quite novel and different. But I suppose some people question the extent to which we can ascribe representativeness to the BRICS grouping. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why there's a move to try and open up its membership. The other thing, I think, and this is acknowledged in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, is that the issues we're facing now, the global climate emergency and the global biodiversity crisis, these are not just issues for developing countries. These are issues for the whole world. Even if the rich countries of Europe and North America bear historical responsibility for, a lot of the carbon emissions that have gone into the atmosphere, we're all in the same boat, if you like, now. And I think what we need now is deeper, more effective multilateralism and cooperation. So I think a lot of people would recognize we need to reform the international system to better reflect the interests and voices of developing countries, and the BRICS, can be part of that certainly. But there's a bigger picture where our survival as a species, as humanity, is really dependent on us cooperating more closely.
Right.
In the UN system and in other fora as well.
Right. Thank you so much for your insights. That was Parik Carmody, Professor of Geography at Trinity College Dublin, for us.
Thank you.
And earlier, CGTN spoke to DJ Pandian, Director General of the Indian Regional Office of the New Development Bank. He shared his insights on the upcoming BRICS Summit. Take a listen.
BRICS Summit, I think they should strengthen the relationship. This is a very, very crucial period for obvious reasons. And but still we need to show to the world that we can create an impact. China's economy is growing. India's economy is growing, and we are Brazil already a big economy. So if all these economies put together in the overall GDP, they're quite high. So what is happening in any of these BRICS countries? It affects other global activities. It affects economic activities in other parts of the globe. So this is one way of showing the solidarity among the nations. In another way of showing the solidarity that we are here to raise fund and to finance our infrastructure requirement. We are here to bridge the gap in the infrastructure development between the developed countries and the developing countries. We are here that we can work together and promote our own local currencies for the infrastructure financing. So this is a very huge alliance.
We're now heading for a short break. Still to come on the program. China's banking sector plays a pivotal role by providing crucial support to its high-tech industries.
Climate change, economic uncertainty, and food insecurity. As the world faces multiple challenges, heads of state of BRICS nations and 55 African countries meet in South Africa with a common goal to promote multilateralism and sustainable development. CGTN will bring you in-depth reports and comprehensive analysis on one of the largest gatherings of developing countries. BRICS Summit 2023. Building an inclusive world.
Welcome back. The 2023 China International Fair for Trade and Services, also known as CIFTIS, will be held in Beijing from September the 2nd to 6th at the China National Convention Center in Shougang Park. Government officials told a press briefing on Monday that all preparatory work for the fair has been completed, adding that the fair includes a global trade and services summit, exhibitions and displays, forums, business promotion talks, product releases, and supporting events. It is expected to continue to serve as a platform for promoting opening up, deepening business cooperation, and boosting innovation. Over 60 entities will unveil new advancements in areas like artificial intelligence, fintech, and healthcare during the fair, and it has attracted wide international participation.
A total of 51 countries and over 24 international organizations will set up exhibition booths during the CIFTIS this year, while over 2,200 enterprises, including some 500 Fortune 500 companies, will participate in the fair.
China's one-year loan prime rate, a market-based benchmark lending rate, was cut today for the second time this year. Analysts say the lower rate will help reduce financing costs and improve credit demand and capital investment. With the government wanting to attract capital to innovation-oriented sectors, our reporter Zhang Shixuan checks out the credit demand and supply in high-tech industries.
These are alumina fibers, a material that remains resilient at temperatures higher than 1,200 degrees. And that is crucial for a variety of modern high-tech manufacturing needs: new energy vehicles, aircraft, spaceflight, petrochemical and steel production. R&D and manufacturing of new materials like this are now listed as one of Shanghai's 5 future industries. And this company in Shanghai specializes in doing just that.
The demand has been increasing. There have been a flood of downstream clients reaching out to us. Some applications were figured out by our downstream clients. Since the application scenarios are so varied, the demand exceeds supply. So in addition to our Shanghai factory, we also have more production plans outside Shanghai. We now have a factory project in Guangxi.
The company's first phase factory was completed last year and is now capable of producing 600 tons of alumina short fibers a year. With the second phase under construction, the plant is costing 3.8 billion yuan and would hardly have been possible without support from the banks. Last year, it took only a month for its loan approval to be issued by the Agricultural Bank of China.
Ordinary loans need approval from the bank's head office based on its criteria for examination and approval. But for science innovation companies, the barriers are lower. Many of them can be approved at our primary sub-branch, and the scale and conditions for their loans are usually more relaxed.
Chen says that so far this year, the department has issued 9.8 billion yuan worth of loans to science and innovation companies. As of the end of June, the renminbi credit loan balance in Shanghai topped more than 10 trillion yuan, an increase of almost 10% from a year ago. The People's Bank of China's Shanghai branch announced in its third quarter press conference that the cost for credit loans have been declining steadily. In June, the weighted average interest rate for corporate loans in Shanghai stood at 3.6%, a 15 basis points drop from the same period last year. The Agricultural Bank of China's Shanghai branch has opened a financial service center for science and innovation companies to provide more targeted services.
The science and innovation companies that our department mainly serves are in new materials manufacturing, medical equipment, brushed metal and related product manufacturing. Due to recent policy support and market demands, these companies now have higher financing demands. So in addition to traditional project loans for them, we also offer a basket of financial services, including payroll credit for migrant workers.
Data from the People's Bank of China shows that loans to technology-based firms saw rapid expansion in the first half of the year in China. Middle and long-term outstanding loans to businesses in the high-tech manufacturing industry stood at 2.5 billion yuan, up more than 40% from a year ago. Outstanding loans to small and medium-sized enterprises working on science and technology projects reached almost 2.4 trillion yuan, up more than a quarter from a year earlier. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Some other headlines we're tracking at this hour. German producer prices decreased more than expected in July, marking the first fall in over 2.5 years. July producer prices were down 6% on a yearly basis. The drop was partly attributed to falling energy prices, which have sunk by nearly 20%. The Maui Island fire in Hawaii damaged or destroyed over 2,000 buildings. Weather provider AccuWeather has increased its estimate of the economic loss from the wildfires from $14 billion to $16 billion. And as a recent survey shows, that Britain's labor market has lost some of its heat. Vacancies and advertised starting salaries fell in July for the first time this year, and job search website Adzuna said the number of job seekers per vacancy rose slightly. However, the overall state of the labor market remains tight. South Korea witnessed a significant decline in its semiconductor exports in July due to reduced demand, primarily in its major export destination, China. However, numerous economists anticipate a rebound in outbound shipments by year-end. Jack Barton reports from Seoul.
South Korean semiconductor exports fell 33.6% year-on-year to the equivalent of almost $7.5 billion, marking a 12-month straight decline for the sector. It's a blow to Asia's fourth largest economy.
Semiconductor is simply the largest export item for Korean economy, which covers about more than 15% of total export. So declining chip export really is a main factor that decreases Korean whole export and Korean economic growth for this year.
The semiconductor dip was just part of an overall decline in exports, which fell 16.5% year-on-year last month, compared to a 6% decline for June.
The decline marks the biggest drop in percentage terms since 2020, and the 10th consecutive month that exports have fallen in annual terms, the longest period in 13 years.
There were significant dips in chips as well as other exports to the EU and US, but their figures combined still fell short of the 25.1% drop in shipments to China, which hasn't yet seen a big post-COVID rebound.
Since their production, particularly in electronics production, is very weak for this year, they have very weak demands for chips from Korea.
Many economists expect the situation to improve by the end of 2023.
It will turn around very quickly, especially because everything becomes based on AI, and AI requires a lot of semiconductors, not just memory chips, but more advanced system semiconductors. So I think the situation will get better.
South Korea's government has pledged to renew efforts to help boost the exports of chips and other goods amid a year of tepid economic growth. Jack Barton, CGTN, Seoul.
And that's all for this edition of Global Business on CGTN. Thank you for being with us. Bye for now.